Ladies and gentlemen of the Action Army, what is going on? And welcome to another episode of Answers for Athletes. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. The head coach of our high school basketball team has the flu, and I was around him, and he was coughing everywhere, and we were in the huddle, 1, 2, 3 Raiders, and now I tried my best not to get it. Tried to avoid him, wash my hands, this, that, and the other, but I'm not feeling the best. Hot, cold, chills. Long story short, I do not feel up to it to actually record Answers for Athletes videos, at least today, maybe tomorrow, I'm not sure. But what I want to do is still give you guys some value. So I'm going to add one of my clips from my podcast. These are going to be some of the better clips that I think can be valuable for you. And that way I can stay consistent by posting every single day on this Answers for Athletes channel. I'm not going to make this a thing. I'm going to stick to the answering questions and posting my journey back to a 43-inch vertical jump. But as of today, we're going to do a podcast clip. Enjoy. True or false? We need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight.
True.
Okay. And just to give you some background, most people listening to this podcast are decently well-educated and well-versed in this stuff. If they've made it to episode 10 of my podcast, they've probably been watching my videos. They probably understand calories in, calories out, calorie deficit, maintenance, surplus, all this type of stuff. And if you don't, in episode 4, Tyler Miller explained macronutrients and a calorie deficit. So while I have Andrew here, I would really like to get into the advanced class stuff.
I love that.
Okay.
And that's, to be fair, where I think one of the comments on so it is true. You have to be at a calorie deficit to lose weight. Where that becomes complex is that people assume caloric output or calories out is static, which is to say that it's a set number.
Right.
That's not true. And so that's where we get into sort of the minutia is calories out is a measure of metabolism. So you and I could take your body fat, I could get your lean mass, I could run your lean mass through the Cunningham equation. You and I could dig into your exercise, I could calculate METs values. I mean, we could get the most accurate measure of estimated calories out that we could possibly get. But what's hilarious is, and I actually just did my last week's Thoughtful Thursday that I do on my Instagram, my Pittsburgh Dietitian Instagram. I do Thoughtful Thursdays every week. Was this radical reality check that calories out depends on calories in, and so your calories out is the measure of your heart beating, brain thinking, nerves functioning, organs functioning, cells dividing, blinking, everything you do to be alive, plus any extra stuff, muscle contraction. If you work long hours, your brain is a muscle that's contracting longer. But what's hilarious is those things are like a factory, right? So a way to think about it is calories out is a measure of heat production. And the problem is the moment you restrict calories in, you immediately start to restrict the capacity for calories out, right? A way to think about it is if you have a factory that works on 10 units of energy and you all of a sudden say, hey, factory, you only get 8 units of energy. Well, yes, there's that backup generator that it's going to use to help, but at some point it's going to start to have to budget its energy out. And so when you start to eat, when you start to provide your body with less calories or energy, because that's something that's actually worth noting, you don't actually consume calories, right? Calories are a measure of heat, their energy out. They're the smoke coming out of the factory. You can trap that. You and I are sitting in a room that's 68 degrees. We're 98.6 degrees. That is heat output. That is our metabolic output. And you you're a pretty tall dude, like what, 6'2", something like that?
6'1", yeah.
6'1", right? You weigh X pounds. Well, your frame producing 98.6, you produce more heat, right, than your girlfriend, which is why she's always cold and
right.
You have to keep her warm, right? You have a little more muscle mass than I do probably. You technically have more heat coming off of you. So your caloric output is a measure of the heat you put off. If you are a fire, that means the firewood you put on the fire makes you hotter. If you eat more, you burn more. If you eat less, you burn less. So what happens is you get people, you and I will do all this math. We'll measure out your estimated calories out. Say it's 3,300. The moment I feed you 2,800, your body will tap into some of the fat stores. And it'll also start to figure out what it can do less of. Can it slow your fingernails growth? Can it make them thinner? Can it slow your hair growth? Can it drop your body temperature just slightly? Can it reduce your serotonin production in your brain, which makes you feel a little bit more lethargic, so you're not as active, so it makes you depressed, right? These are all subtle things that your metabolism can do, and what that does is it reduces your caloric burn. And so instead of you burning 3,300 by math, now all of a sudden you're burning 3,100. And so it only has to provide a little bit of fat for the burn. And that's where people always talk about when they're losing weight, especially long term, they have plateaus. That's their body eventually getting to the point where it is matching calories out to calories in. But when you recognize that calories out is a metabolism, is a net measure of all your output, it's not surprising to know that that's contingent on input. And so one of the other pieces, the instead of the 101, calories in, calories out, the 102 is calories out depend on calories in. That all of a sudden makes a whole lot of sense, right? You eat a bunch, your body has the energy it needs to run the factory that then burns a bunch, and then there's a lot of smoke coming out of the smokestack, right? Or you put a lot of wood on the fire, that fire gets real big, the smoke coming off that fire gets really big. And so, yes, calories in, calories out is true, but calories out depend on calories in. And there's immense amounts of research that show if you restrict calories and then you take that math of how many calories you restricted, the weight loss is always less than predicted. And the inverse is true. If you give people a caloric surplus and you estimate how much weight you'd expect them to gain, it's also never right. And the reason is because the body burns more when it's given more. It burns less when it's given less. Some people's bodies are genetically better at adapting, right? So they're going to be more likely to conserve energy more quickly, which is to say the moment they get a deficit, their body starts to burn less a little more quickly. In our society, people tend to starve themselves. They go too hard. They think, oh, well, if I do a 500 calorie deficit a day, that's 1 pound. So a 1,500 calorie deficit is 3 pounds. Here's the problem. A 1,500 calorie deficit is very likely to either come from extreme amounts of exercise, which changes the ratio of carbs and fats being burned, or it's going to come from extreme restriction below your basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories your body needs to just be alive, lay on a couch completely still. If you go below BMR, you have officially told your body it's starving, and it activates starvation mechanisms. It starts to do all the things I mentioned before, slows all these other parts, lowers your temperature a little bit, drops your serotonin, makes you a little bit depressed so that you're less active. All of those types of things. So your body has starvation mechanisms to prevent you from withering away.
Right.
So it's not ever going to be the easy math of, oh, if I restrict this much, I'm going to lose this much. And the bigger deficit you create, the quicker your body's going to catch on, and it's going to start to deploy mechanisms to keep you alive. I say it that way to recognize it's not fighting you. It's not the villain in this story. It's actually on your side. It's trying to keep you alive longer because it doesn't know that you're doing this out of some level of aesthetic or vanity. Right. It thinks that you're in a desert and you don't have food.
Yeah.
It's trying to help you. So yes, it's true, but there's a whole lot of hormonal factors to consider.
Right. Are you familiar with Dr. Andy Galpin?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've always understood that it is calories in versus calories out, but when he broke down with Andrew Huberman, everything that goes into calories in and also calories out, I was like, I don't even want to even learn, like that's too much for me. I'm just going to stick to the basics.
Absolutely. But that's what's always tricky is it calories in, calories out is a thermodynamic measure, but what people don't realize is it's just what I'll say, like you said, to simplify for people is it's just not static. Calories in, well, calories aren't technically something you eat. You eat carbs, fat, and protein. Those go into your liver and they become ATP. ATP goes into your cells to drive cellular processes. Those cells do those processes. That produces heat like a muscle that contracts.
Right.
That's why we sweat when we exercise, right? Our muscles produce a bunch of heat, raises our body temperature. We get sweaty to try and cool ourselves. All processes drive heat. That heat is measured in calories. So you don't eat calories, you eat energy that is converted to ATP. Well, the conversion of a bowl of Cheerios to ATP is not an exact science. So calories in has some measure of volatility. Calories out is your body's expense. Your body's expense is contingent on your body's intake, which is why it's calories in versus calories out, not calories out versus calories in. Right? And so it's to say that while that baseline concept is true, it's not based on that static mathematic equation that we think it is.